Welcome to the presentation on the eschatology in the Psalms. Let me go ahead and share my screen so you can see my PowerPoint presentation. So it might surprise you that there is mention of the end times in the Psalms. So many people, when they start with this series, think that the end times are basically in the book of Revelation, but they are scattered throughout. And if you've been listening to our other presentations, you know I use the analogy that it's sort of like a puzzle piece, all the prophecies and predictions about the end times, the end of the age. And it's like God cut it up into all these little pieces, shook up the box, and then just gave pieces to every book in the Bible. Like there's pieces of it, some more than others. And there are Psalms that do describe the end times. So remember from before, the eschatology means the end times. And if you ever hear me say the phrase eschatological, don't be intimidated by that. Like if you want to turn the noun eschatology into a adjective, you would say eschatological. So if I say eschatological psalms, I'm meaning psalms that address the end of the age. So moving on, there are actually 20 psalms which explicitly describe end of the age events. So if you're this is the first presentation you're seeing, you're probably going to want to go back and look at our other presentations. It will make more sense once you kind of know, you'll see them as I read them when you already have experience knowing and identifying those events that come at the end of the age. Now next, I have created a chart, and if you have the handout, I have this chart there for you. Psalms describing specific periods at the end of the age. So I just made, what I actually did in my study of all this is I read the entire Psalms. There's 150. And I broke down which ones related to the end of the age. And I found 3 that related to the Great Tribulation. Quite a few that you can see that relate to the day of the Lord, the second coming of Christ, and then some on the millennial reign of Christ. So I just kind of broke it down into those. Now, to just kind of explain the colors, if it is black, that means it actually falls into all, like 1 or 2 to 3 of those categories. So you can see 9 actually describes all 3, and we're going to discuss that one. So you're going to see what I'm talking about. Covers all 3 of those periods. 2 covers these 2 periods, and then as well as 68, 96, and 102. So the rest that are in blue just mean they're only about that particular time period. So just keep that chart handy so you can know, and if you wanted to go and research that on your own. Moving on, we're just going to actually go through and address particular psalms. I'm only going to talk about 5. You've seen that there's 20, but I only have time to address a few of them. So God in Psalm 9 is described as the Lord Most High and Righteous Judge. So let's go ahead and read that. So turn with me to Psalm 9. I've actually got this section completely, notes all over it, scribblings all over it, because it does, and let me just go to my next screen so I can show you what I'm talking about. It goes back and forth between the various time periods, and like I said, it covers all 3. So this is sort of a guide as we're reading, and I will talk about it as we go to kind of help you break it down. So Psalm 9, it says, for the choir director, according to Laban, a psalm of David. It says, I will thank the Lord with all my heart. I will declare all your wondrous works. I will rejoice and boast about you. I will sing about your name most high. When my enemies retreat, they stumble and perish before you. For you have upheld my just cause. You are seated on your throne as a righteous judge. So 1 through 4, David is the speaker, and you can tell we're in his present day. So he's talking about his enemies that are coming after him. He had quite a few at various times in his life. So he's relating this as a very personal thing for him. But you're going to see how it swiftly, like he moves so quickly, like so fluidly back and forth between his own present day events and prophecy, whether he knew that God was prophesying through him about the son of David, which is Jesus Christ, the eventual son of David, like, so he's a descendant of him. So he moves so fluidly between those, it's hard to catch when the shift is happening. So he's describing, you are seated on your throne. I wanted to point out when it says are, that means he is seated on the throne now in this case. Now we know that God is always seated on his throne, but Jesus is going to be a more full realization of that when he comes back to earth. He is at the right hand of the Father right now, but he will, when he comes to earth, be the righteous judge, not acting in that role at present. So we're going to see what he describes next. So during, like, look at verses 5 through 8, and that's going to show you about the millennium. You have rebuked the nations. So this is why I'm saying it's during the millennium. It's already happened. So he's moved to, it's like he's taking a time machine. He's moving forward in it all the way to the end after the day of the Lord and the great tribulation. He's gone into the millennium. And he's saying, you have rebuked the nations. You have destroyed the wicked. You have erased their name forever and ever. Now, God has not done that in our present time, and he will not do that until after, during the day of the Lord. So we know that this is referring to the millennium. The enemy has come to eternal ruin. You have uprooted the cities, and the very memory of them has perished. So when what this part he's describing, it's well into the millennium, and the memory of all of this that happened is, no one even thinks about it anymore. But the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for judgment, and he judges the world with righteousness. He executes judgment on the nations with fairness. So all of that is the millennium reign. Now we're shifting 9 through 10 back into the great tribulation. The Lord is a refuge for the persecuted. So obviously during the millennium, nobody's being persecuted. So this is shifting back to that time where there's specific persecution against believers during the great tribulation. The Lord is a refuge for the persecuted, a refuge in times of trouble. Those who know your name trust in you, because you have not abandoned those who seek you, Lord. Then he's shifting back. If you look at verse 11, sing to the Lord who dwells in Zion. Well, he's not, Zion is another name for Jerusalem. So he's not currently physically dwelling in Jerusalem. Sing to the Lord who dwells in Zion, proclaim his deeds among the nations. So as you saw, he shifted back to the millennium for a second. Now he's going to go back and remembering back to the great tribulation again. Verse 12, for the one who seeks an accounting for bloodshed remembers them. He does not forget the cry of the oppressed. Be gracious to me, Lord. Consider my affliction at the hands of those who hate me. Lift me up from the gates of death, so that I may declare all your praises. I will rejoice in your salvation within the gates of daughter Zion. Now we see again, 15 and 16 is more concentrated on the day of the Lord. It says, the nations have fallen into the pit they made. Their foot is caught in the net they have concealed. The Lord has made himself known, and that's when he makes himself known on that day of the Lord. He has executed justice, snaring the wicked by the work of their hands. And then verse 17, we're shifting back to the millennium. The wicked will return to Sheol, all the nations that forget God. For the needy will not always be forgotten. The hope of the oppressed will not perish forever. And now, back to the day of the Lord. Rise up, Lord. Do not let mere humans prevail. Let the nations be judged in your presence. Put terror in them, Lord. Let the nations know they are only humans. So as you can see, hopefully that helped you see how it's broken up and how he keeps going back and forth. We're going to keep moving on and describe, well, why is it that God is judging? We can see him as the righteous judge here. And if you look back at verse 4, it says, for you have upheld my just cause. You are seated on your throne as a righteous judge. So the narrator, which is David, he's upholding the narrator's just cause. So he's a God of justice. Now next we see it is the reason he has established his throne on earth. That is in verse 7. So that the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for judgment. That's the purpose for establishing that throne. Might surprise a lot of people. They think that we don't judge, that God doesn't judge, but that is simply not true. He is the righteous judge. And when he comes the second time, that is the main role that he is going to be doing, judging the nations and judging those who persecuted the believers, those who did not submit to the will of God. And then the third reason why God is judging is God has not forgotten the needy and oppressed. So a lot of times when people don't like the idea of a God who is judging, they forget that if we don't have justice, then those who do evil and hurt people, those who cause harm, they're getting away with it. So verse 12 says, "For the one who seeks an accounting for bloodshed remembers them. He does not forget the cry of the oppressed." So anyone who has ever experienced some, and I'm sure most of us have, some more severe than others, where there's been injustice against us, we know that there needs to be an accounting for that. Even if there is forgiveness, there needs to be, or reconciliation, there needs to be someone paying back or giving retribution for what was done. Verse 18 says, "For the needy will not always be forgotten. The hope of the oppressed will not perish forever." So next, we're going to talk about, well, how does God judge? What is the way, the methods that he's using? He judges with righteousness and fairness. So we can be sure and confident that he's going to be fair in his judging. He's not going to be cruel in any way. Like, it's going to, the punishment that he provides is going to be a match for what was done. Verse 15 and 16 talks about catching the enemy in their own trap. He's going to do that. They're going to be trying to foil God's plans, and he's going to catch them in that. And 3, he uses terror. That is in verse 20. So if we look at that again, "Put terror in them, Lord. Let the nations know they are only humans." So that's probably surprising that God's going to use that. Some people don't like to think of God that way, but we know from the day of the Lord, that is what's going to happen. He's going to use terror. And then 4th, he reminds humans of their own fragility. So that says, remind them that they're only humans. Now, we're going to go ahead and move on to Psalm 60. So turn to Psalm 60. This psalm takes place during the Great Tribulation, and it's from the perspective of Israel. So don't think about it from the perspective of those Christians who will be here. And you're going to see, well, I'll get to that later. So let's go ahead and read that. "For the choir director, according to the lily of testimony, a miktam of David for teaching, when he fought with Aram Naharaim and Aram Zobah, and Joab returned and struck Edom in Salt Valley, killing 12,000. God, you have rejected us. You have broken us down. You have been angry. Restore us. You have shaken the land and split it open. Heal its fissures, for it shudders. You have made your people suffer hardship." I'm going to pause right there and say, that's how I knew it's from the perspective of Israel. When it says your people, he's talking about the chosen people, Israel. "You have given us wine to drink that made us stagger. You have given a signal flag to those who fear you, so that they can flee before the archers." Now, right there is a clue that those who are looking for these signs right now, whether this is, I don't know if it's specifically talking about just Israelites who are believers, Jews who are believers, Messianic Jews, or if it's also including other Christians, any believer in that. It could be both of those. But those who, I would assume both, because anyone who fears God, and they can flee. So God's giving them an opportunity to flee. But you're only going to know about that opportunity if you know the signs, which we would have just addressed in previous studies. So God has, as you can see, he has rejected them. So up in verse 1, it says, "God, you have rejected us." Talking about Israel, because they just continue to not do what the Lord expects. And so at this point, he's done. He's rejected them. But we see the hope, because a remnant is rescued. So let me continue reading in verse 5. "Save with your right hand and answer me, so that those you love may be rescued." So that remnant, those who feared him, will be rescued. So God has spoken in his sanctuary. I will celebrate. I will divide up Shechem. I will apportion the valley of Succoth. Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, and Ephraim is my helmet. Judah is my scepter. Moab is my wash basin. Well, that's hard to say. I throw my sandal on Edom. I shout in triumph over Philistia. So I've included this map for verses 6 through 8 so that we can, so that makes sense, because I'm sure if you're like me, you are unfamiliar with those locations. So basically, it's hard to see in this map because, you know, it was the best one I could find that would show all the places that I was talking about, or most of the places. But I have looked at this ahead of time. So Shechem would be in this area right here, not far above the Dead Sea. This is like Jericho right here. And so this area is going to be Shechem. And the valley of Sukkoth, I don't know how to say it, but I think it's this valley right here. It's hard to find from maps. Sometimes there's a question mark on them about that one. Gilead is mine, so you can see Gilead up here. He's claiming that. So Jesus is celebrating in this case what he is dividing up. Like Israel is being divided up during his time. Some are his and some basically are not his. He's claiming that. So Gilead is mine, and then he says Manasseh is mine. So see, both of these areas are his. Ephraim is his. He's claiming that that's his helmet. And what's interesting, from his perspective, he would be down in Jerusalem, which I believe is right around here. It's really hard to see on this map what it's saying. So in this area. So it's kind of interesting because if he's thinking of, it's interesting to me that he's describing Ephraim as his helmet, because if this Jerusalem would be where he was, this makes sense. That would be on your head. So kind of picture it that way. And then he's saying Judah is my scepter. So this area right here, Judah, would be about, you know, where the arm would be. The scepter indicates, though, that that's the area from which he reigns. That's where his kingdom is set up. Moab is my wash basin. So you look over here at Moab. Basically, that's a rejection of it. He's saying, this is where I wash my dirty hands. This is where that dirty water is. This is pretty rejected. And then I throw my sandal on Edom. So if you're thinking about this, like think of this as the helmet, the hands, we're washing over here. You can see this matches where his feet would be. And he's basically saying, I throw my sandal on Edom. Basically, he's not happy with that area. So he's basically given up on that. Now, of course, that wouldn't be part of Israel, but we do know, and I won't go into all of the history. That's just an area that he has rejected. So, and then we see, I shout in triumph. So he's had victory over Philistia. So this area right here. Just wanted to show that so that you would understand what 6 through 8 was even talking about. And then this is really cool. I'm going to go into verse 9 now. So look in your chapter on verse 9. Who will bring me to the fortified city? Who will lead me to Edom? God, haven't you rejected us? God, you do not march out with our armies. Give us aid against the foe, for human help is worthless. With God we will perform valiantly. He will trample our foes. So what's so interesting here is that in Edom, I had showed you where Edom was, where he threw his sandal. There's a place called Petra. I don't know for sure from this text if it's talking about that place, but it makes sense to me that it could be, because it says the fortified city. So when I think of a fortified city, I think of Petra. Some of you may have probably heard of it. It's a pretty famous place. So, and it's in what's called modern day Jordan, but it's also, that's the land of Edom. So he's saying, who will lead me to Edom? So my connection that I'm making, and it's just a speculation, but I feel it's probably pretty solid. When he's talking in verse 4 about fleeing before the archers, there is also description of him. Let me find that for you. So if we look at verse 9, who will bring me to the fortified city? Who will lead me to Edom? Skip over to Revelation 12. We've discussed this in other studies, but I'm going to bring your attention to it now. So go to Revelation 12, 13 through 17. When the dragon saw that he had been thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who had given birth to the male child. That would be Israel, who gave birth to Jesus Christ, the Messiah. The woman was given 2 wings of a great eagle so that she could fly from the serpent's presence to her place in the wilderness, where she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time. If you were with us before, you know that that means 3.5 years. That's during the Great Tribulation, that she's going to flee to the wilderness and be nourished. From his mouth, that means the serpent, which is really the Antichrist. The serpent spewed water like a river flowing after the woman to sweep her away with a flood. But the earth helped the woman. The earth opened its mouth and swallowed up the river that the dragon had spewed from its mouth. So the dragon was furious with the woman and went off to wage war against the rest of her offspring, which would be Christians, those who keep the commands of God and hold firmly to the testimony about Jesus. So you probably, now that I've read it, are familiar with that passage. And let me just go back one if I can. Oops, that's putting me ahead, sorry. Okay, just going back to Petra. To show you, it's my theory. This is just a theory that I'm speculating about, that it could be that this wilderness where they are protected, that they can flee to when they see the warning signs, would be this Petra area. It makes sense because it's fortified. And I was just so excited when I found this little treasure looking through Psalms, because I hadn't seen it anywhere else, just from reading through the Psalms when I did this study. I saw this thing. I was like, well, where is Edom? They're saying, who will bring me to the fortified city? Who will lead me to Edom? And then I looked it up and found out that this is in Edom, this area called Petra. So even though it looked like that was just one area, like it's a whole city, like lots of different buildings. And so this is just a more far away look of that built into the rocks. Pretty cool, huh? All right. So the next one we're going to address is Psalm 97. So turn with me to Psalm 97. This is during the day of the Lord time period, which is synonymous with when Jesus comes back, the second coming of the Most High. They use that term because that's what they refer to him here as in Psalm 97. Let's go ahead and read that. The Lord reigns. Let the earth rejoice. Let the many coasts and islands be glad. Clouds and total darkness surround him. So I want you to listen to this description, because it's total clues. Like, you've seen tidbits about what the day of the Lord is about, but I felt like this is very descriptive of what it's going to look like right before he comes. So clouds and total darkness surround him. Remember, there's darkness that falls on the face of the earth for a time period. We don't know how long, but that's it's going to obscure him at first. He's going to be coming. These clouds will be there. There's going to be total darkness. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Then fire goes out before him and burns up his foes on every side. So that's what we're going to be seeing when the day of the Lord starts to occur. Darkness and clouds, then he's going to come on the clouds, and fire is going to precede him. Verse 4, his lightning lights up the world. So think about it. It's been dark for a time period, and suddenly the world is lit up by this lightning. It's very dramatic. The earth sees and trembles. The mountains melt like wax. So this is the cosmic disturbances we have been learning about. Basically, there's a giant earthquake that's causing all this to happen. The mountains melt like wax at the presence of the Lord, at the presence of the Lord of the whole earth. The heavens proclaim his righteousness. All the people see his glory. So this is that moment where they're like, we can't deny it anymore. This is the real thing. This is the God we have rejected. All who serve carved images, those who boast in idols, will be put to shame. All the gods must worship him. Zion hears, remember Zion being Jerusalem, and is glad. Judah's villages rejoice because of your judgments, Lord. For you, Lord, are the most high over the whole earth. You are exalted above all the gods. Now think of that. We have to be rejoicing in his judgments. There's going to be some terrible things that happen. He's got fire coming before him and lightning. It's not this gentle shepherd view. Like, that is God as well. But in this moment, that's not how he's presenting himself. But those who are on the side of right are going to be rejoicing in his judgments. Verse 10, you who love the Lord hate evil. He protects the lives of his faithful ones. He rescues them from the power of the wicked. Light dawns for the righteous. So think about it for the others that see this lightning and this fire. It's going to be scary. But for us, those of us, actually, I should be moving ahead while we do this. So this is kind of like picture of the lightning and Jesus coming back on this horse. I really like this picture. And then the mountains melting like wax before the Lord, Psalm 97:5. And this right here, for those of us who don't have anything to fear because we've been following him, the light dawns for the righteous, gladness for the upright in heart. Be glad in the Lord, you righteous ones, and give thanks to his holy name. So this just gives you a great picture of the day of the Lord. Those who God is coming to judge, they're going to be afraid. Those of us who have just been waiting for this moment because we've been through so much and we just can't wait for God to set foot on the earth. That's what it's going to be like for us. So that just shows you a contrast between those two groups. So now we're going to move on to Psalm 110. Turn to Psalm 110. This is also about the day of the Lord. You're just going to hear it described in different ways. Okay, verse 1. This is the declaration of the Lord. To my Lord. Now let me pause right there because that might be incredibly confusing. If your Bible is like mine, the first Lord is all caps. And so that would be, I believe that means it's Yahweh. And to my Lord, and only the first letter is capitalized. That would be, I believe, Adonai. So what basically that is, it's not explicitly stated in the text, but what it means is God the Father, the first Lord, is speaking to Jesus, his son, in this case. So that should clear that up. Sit at my right hand until I make your enemies your footstool. So we do know this from other texts that Jesus is sitting down at the right hand of God. So now it's going to make a lot more sense. So God the Father, Jesus, who's also God, sitting next to him at his right hand. But right now, this is in the present. He's sitting there until God makes his enemy his footstool. So this is not something he's done yet. He doesn't do it until the day of the Lord. Then we're going to keep going. Verse 2. The Lord will extend your mighty scepter from Zion. So he's talking to Jesus. Rule over your surrounding enemies. Your people, those are all believers, will volunteer on your day of battle. So I wrote that for verse 3. Day of battle, another name for the day of the Lord. In holy splendor from the womb of the dawn. It's just so poetic. The dew of your youth belongs to you. It's kind of describing that day when he comes back, that dawn, and he's just a beautiful description of that day. The Lord has sworn an oath and will not take it back. You are a priest forever, according to the pattern of Melchizedek. And verse 5 says, the Lord is at your right hand. He will crush kings on the day of his anger. So there's another name for the day of the Lord, or the day of wrath, day of his anger. He will judge the nations, heaping up corpses. He will crush leaders over the entire world. He will drink from the brook by the road. Therefore, he will lift up his head. Now, I was listening to this read in another Bible study that had absolutely nothing to do with the end of the age. And when I read that, it just clicked with me because I have watched the movie called Samson. So sometimes Hollywood movies do not do a great job. In fact, I'm aggravated with most of them. But in this case, I mean, there were some discrepancies, but for the most part, I really liked how they did Samson, the most recent one that they did. And when I read this piece in verse 7, he will drink from the brook by the road, it triggered something in me because I remembered back to the movie, and it was just odd in the movie. So in the movie, Samson kills he kills 1,000 people with a jawbone. These armies come against him and he kills these Philistines with a jawbone. So and after he does all that, he actually he doesn't have, there's no water anywhere around, and he's well, actually, let's just go there. Don't just let me talk about it. Let me go there. Judges 15. I think it's going to be on your screen, so let's get it. Judges 15, 16 through 19. Samson is a type for Jesus. Now, I want you to be very clear when I talk about a type. I'm not Samson had a lot of sin in his life. He had problems with women. He broke his vows. So I'm not saying that Jesus is like him in that way. Jesus is like him because he was strong and mighty and he delivered his people. So that is the sense in which he is a type. So go to Judges 15, 16 through 19. I was always so surprised that God spent so much time discussing Samson. It's more about him than any other judge. Because I was like, wow, this guy probably had the worst character, but like there's parts of it that God is trying to show you something about himself. Always remember that he's trying to show you about himself and reveal himself to you through the word. So if you go to chapter 15, verse 16, that says, then Samson said, with the jawbone of a donkey, I have piled them in heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. When he finished speaking, he threw away the jawbone and named that place Ramath-lehi. He became very thirsty and called to the Lord. You have accomplished this great victory through your servant. Must I now die of thirst and fall into the hands of the uncircumcised? So God split a hollow place in the ground at Lehi, and water came out of it. After Samson drank, his strength returned, and he revived. That is why he named it En-Hakkore, which is still in Lehi today. And he judged Israel 20 years in the days of the Philistines. So in the movie, it just so evident, like where water wasn't, he suddenly like falls down. It doesn't have him talking in the movie. I wish it did, because it's so powerful what he actually says, the dialogue here. First of all, he's complaining, which is strange. He knows God like helped him defeat all of these, and he's basically like, I'm so thirsty, I'm about to die. So he was more intimidated by his thirst than he was by 1,000 men he could just killed. So here he is, he drops down. In the movie, you see him like, and suddenly water bubbles up, because he prays basically for it, and God like brings this water up miraculously where there was none from the ground. So because I think I never, like, I'd read this passage several times, but until I saw in the movie, I don't think it would have clicked with me when I was reading it here, because it's so odd. So you see Jesus going to be crushing his enemies and so forth. And then in verse 7, he will drink from the brook by the road. I'm like, what? Why is that relevant? What does it have to do with anything? But to me, it was the trigger. I was like, wow, it's like the Bible Project person. He always says they're hyperlinks. He describes them as hyperlinks. So they're linking one another. And that was just the trigger right there. So he's drinking and he's revived. He says, therefore he will lift up his head. So you noticed after Samson drunk, he was revived. And so this too, Jesus is revived. He lifts up his head now after killing all of these people, and he's able to be revived. So just to show you from the movie what it looks like, Samson, this is him enraged, killing with a jawbone. And to go on, this would be a great depiction of verse 6. He will judge the nation, heaping up corpses. He will crush leaders over the entire world. So there really is like 1,000 men that come after him, and he kills them, and Jesus will kill even more. But you see this in verse 16. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have piled them in heaps. With the jawbone of a donkey, I have killed 1,000 men. So we see even heaping up corpses. There's such a close parallel there. So that's triggering you to think back to Samson. So I know that we often think of Jesus this way. And he is like this. He's gentle. He's a gentle shepherd, a guide. And for those of us who are believers, this is how he is going to be, gentle and kind. And that is an aspect of him. But we tend to only get this picture in our culture. And we don't get this picture. So Samson being a type of Jesus, this is probably far closer to what he looks like than this. Just even like he's darker. He doesn't have this light brown hair probably. It's probably much darker. So this is a shocking version of Jesus that we don't want to think about and don't want to see. But this is how he's going to come. the second time. And this is exactly like, if this makes you squeamish, you need to actually get serious, like have a conversation with God. Say, God, wow, did not know this was part of who you were. You know, this is an aspect of you, your wrath. To me, this just gives us a good visual image of this is what he's going to do when he's attacking his enemy. I'm not saying with a jawbone, but I'm just saying the parallel here. He sees Samson sort of as a precursor for what he's going to do. All right. Oh, let me go back just because I wanted to show you another connection. I don't have this in your handout. So I thought I knew about the connection, but I forgot to add it in, and then I was reminded of it again. So go to Psalm 3. I saw this again later because we actually were singing Psalm 3 at my church, and so I knew a large portion of it. And then I went to look it up because we'd been singing that psalm, and I saw further connections. So Psalm 3 says, Lord, how my foes increase. Think about Samson. It's like more and more men coming at him. There are many who attack me. Many say about me, there is no help for him in God. But you, Lord, are a shield around me. So I would encourage you to watch the movie Samson. And so there's like, he's surrounded at some points with people all around him, and he's just able to attack them all. But God gives him the strength and is a shield around him. And he's my glory, the one who lifts up my head. So you see that language again, lifting up your head. I cry aloud to the Lord, and he answers me from his holy mountain. I lie down and sleep. I wake again because the Lord sustains me. I will not be afraid of thousands of people. To me, that word thousands, it's another hyperlink, because Samson slayed 1,000, and then we're heaping up corpses by the thousands. I will not be afraid of thousands of people who have taken their stand against me on every side. So that totally describes Samson and Jesus when he returns. All the nations will have been rising up against him. And this is an encouragement, God, to rise up, Lord. Save me, my God. You strike all my enemies on the cheek. You break the teeth of the wicked, which definitely wouldn't happen with a jawbone. Salvation belongs to the Lord. May your blessing be on your people. So maybe reading too much into it to see that, but my brain just started making all of those connections as well. All right, we're going to move on to another Psalm 48. So turn to Psalm 48. This psalm is about the millennial reign. The Lord is great and highly praised in the city of our God. His holy mountain, rising splendidly, is the joy of the whole earth. Mount Zion, the summit of Zaphon, is the city of the great king. God is known as a stronghold in its citadels. Look, the kings assembled. They advanced together. They looked and froze with fear. They fled in terror. So that's talking right there about the day of the Lord. Trembling seized them there, agony like that of a woman in labor, as you wrecked the ships of Tarshish with the east wind. But this is kind of looking back on that, like that's already happened. Just as we heard, so we have seen in the city of the Lord of armies, in the city of our God. God will establish it forever. God, within your temple, we contemplate your faithful love. Like your name, God, so your praise reaches to the ends of the earth. Your right hand is filled with justice. Mount Zion is glad. Judah's villages rejoice because of your judgments. Go around Zion, encircle it, count its towers, note its ramparts, tower its citadels, so that you can tell a future generation, this God, our God, forever and ever, he will always lead us. So there's a couple of things I want to point out here in verse 2, something that I noticed that connected with something in Zechariah. And I just love this when God gives me moments of like connecting things. I can't even remember how I found this connection, to be honest, but it was just like a finding treasure. So first let's look back at verse 2. It says, the Lord is great and highly praised. This is verse 1. In the city of our God, his holy mountain, rising splendidly is the joy of the whole earth. It's talking about Jerusalem, rising splendidly, the joy of the whole earth. So go to Zechariah. I know that's not a chapter you probably, book you've been in much, but it's right before the last book, which is Malachi. Zechariah 14, verse 10. And I'm going to go on to 11. All the land from Geba, and I have this here so we know where Geba is. And who knows if I'm pronouncing that right. So Geba right here. All the land from Geba to Rimmon down here, south of Jerusalem, will be changed into a plain. So right now, all this area, as you can see, like its highest, where is this dark orange, it will be more like a plain, this color. All of this is mountainous. I have a 3D map, and yes, this whole area is mountains. But all of this area will become a plain of the result of, when he comes back, he's flattening stuff. The mountains, they're melting, remember. So all of the land from Geba to Rimmon, south of Jerusalem, will be changed into a plain. But Jerusalem will be raised up and will remain on its site from the Benjamin gate to the place of the first gate, to the corner gate, and from the tower of Hananel to the royal wine presses. People will live there, and never again will there be a curse of complete destruction. So Jerusalem will dwell in security. So from that point on, when Jesus comes and establishes himself, there will be a final rebellion in, but they are not able to attack Jerusalem successfully. Like, they're basically, fire comes down and consumes them before they can do anything. So from this point on, Jerusalem is dwelling in security with Jesus reigning there. And it's just such a small space, but once you know about Zechariah 14:10, look back. His holy mountain, think about it as a mountain, Jerusalem, this raised site. Let me pull this down so you can see. They're saying Zechariah, I found this, I was looking for something that would show this area that shows Geba and Rimmon. And I just stumbled upon this. Thankfully, they had caught, the Zechariah 14:10. So rising splendidly is a joy of the whole earth. So everything else becomes a plain, but Jerusalem is raised up. Just a small little kernel of insight that connects this Psalm 48 with Zechariah 14:10. Don't you just love it when we get those little treasures? I just love searching for that and having the Holy Spirit reveal those things to me. And this slide is just the last of that, like verse 14. This God, our God, forever and ever, he will always lead us from that point on. So this is kind of just a painting of Jerusalem at that point. And I felt these people looked kind of worshipful, and it looked almost like heaven was part of it. All right, moving on. I wanted to show you, we're not covering all these, don't get nervous. What we had addressed was basically Psalms that related to the end of the age, specifically describing events that we've been covering, whether it was, and if you look back at our chart, during the Great Tribulation, during the Day of the Lord or the Second Coming, or during the Millennial Reign. Well, now these Psalms are totally different. They're just excellent Psalms for your study if you are here during the time of the tribulation. I love this little picture of these birds taking refuge in this rock, and that just sort of depicted to me what God can do for us in that time to protect us. All of these Psalms, you'll have this slide. It's on your handout as well. So just look at those, read those on your own time. We're not going to go through any of them. We did talk about Psalm 3 being your refuge and God defending you against your enemies. So we did that first one. But these really address and would be helpful during that time. And hopefully I will eventually be doing a devotional that will cover these as well as the others. So maybe there'll be two separate ones, one that are like, or parts to it, two parts, Psalms that relate to refuge during that time, and then others that relate to the specific events. But that is the end of the presentation. I'll stop my share. So I do hope that you've enjoyed that presentation and are now more informed about how the Psalms relate to the end of the age. Thank you.